Hello there. I am BY. Now, you see, we did write essays previously, me and a person. No, I wrote an essay. There were some issues. Namely, I was quite lazy, and so we failed to write more than that, especially because of poor communication on my part. Combine that with the AI idea flunking, and yeah, it didn't work out too well. However, well, I figured might as well at least try to do something. So, here's what I'm gonna do. I am going to talk to you about things. And let's start off with something that, I understand at least a bit of the economy. See, the economy is not something that you can just understand easily. Not because it's complicated in the sense of, rocket science, of a lot of very specialized things, but rather, it's complicated because it is the sum total of human actions. It is built off of interactions between people. And when there's billions of people, that's going to be a very complicated web. For a country, you're going to deal with 300 million in the US's case? Definitely a bit more because of outside trade, but for an economy, legitimately, it is hard to have a uncomplicated economy, especially in the modern day where international trade and specialization have reached such a point where I could theoretically go on Amazon right now and buy these gloves or something else for cheap from another country after going through 2 or 3 different ones. Truly, it is remarkable in that regard. But the important thing is, how does this economy work? Well, let's start with the number one thing: currency. Currency is but a medium of exchange. It has no inherent value, fiat or otherwise. And so, all that matters for a currency is how well it can be used to trade between people. That means, if you, for example, wish to buy a loaf of bread, what matters is whatever currency you're using. Could be the euro, could be the dollar, could even be a yen, dong, that's actually Vietnam's currency, or some other number. It could be any of them. But so long as it is able to buy bread, that works. If it can't, then it is worthless in terms of your use. And so that is the biggest thing involving a currency, is making sure people trust it enough to use it. Because if they don't trust it, they won't accept it as currency, and therefore it fails at its purpose. Because cash is a go-between. Instead of me having to, say, trade a book for that bread, or pick up a rock and ask him if he wants it, I can just give them some cash. They respect it because it has a universal use as an intermediary, and they give me the bread. And that is where things like central banking come in. See, a central bank serves to regulate cash. Now, that doesn't always do it effectively, mind you, but that is its purpose. And so here's where it fits into the whole system. Let's say, for example, I had $100 in my bank account. Just for comparison, here's what $100 looks like. Let's say I had that in my bank account and I wanted to withdraw it back in the 1800s. Okay, so I withdraw it. No big deal. Here's the issue. In most of the 1800s, there was no central bank. As a result, there were many issues with inflation. Particularly, people worried about what would happen if, say, one lone bank decided to print a bunch of money. So, what they would do with my $100, if that were the case, is they would only take it at partial value. Meaning, I could deposit that in a bank a few miles out, and they would say, alright, we'll take your money, but we're only going to accept it for $75 or $80. That's how they kept inflation in check. a central bank keeps inflation in check by controlling the money supply. So it doesn't matter what bank you are, you will receive $100 officially in that new bank account. But, and this is the issue, the central bank is controlling the inflation, which means if the central bank decides to cause 25% inflation for some reason, because they want really, really cheap loans or some other nonsense, what's going to happen is your dollar is going to lose value anyways. And so a central bank can work, and indeed I would argue it's better than wildcat banking, but it has the issue of if the central bank, or in the US's case the Federal Reserve, decides to commission much more money than the economy can reasonably afford, or practice inflationary policies like lowering interest rates through the buying and selling of bonds, then it ends up creating a mess for the economy because it ruins savings. So we need to expect of our politicians the control of it. In particular, we need them to not be idiots, but most of them still follow interventionary monetary policy, so that's unlikely. On another note, since briefly we saw this is a book about the Constitution and other documents in relation to our founding. Do you want to know how many policies in relation to the economy are allowed in here? You may say, oh, a few, maybe regulation of some things that are old, like food and drugs or something like that. Nope. The post office, interstate commerce, a bank, actually, and income tax. Those are in there. Most other regulations are assumed powers which Congress took up because they passed laws in relation to them. As a result, the government is going beyond constitutional authority to do them. Now, there is a necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, so they could fall under there. However, importantly with economic regulation, a lot of that isn't necessary and it actually hurts the economy. Therefore, to argue it being necessary and proper is a whole load of bollocks. Would it be? Yeah, I suppose that would work. This creates several issues. For example, let's take a look at another book I have here. You may have recognized it, you may have not. This is The Progressive Era by Murray Rothbard. Now, I got my issues with Rothbard for a number of reasons, but he did nail it on the head, and if you want, you can actually look at the data here and see exactly what these regulations, especially during World War I, did. They cartelized industry, allowing big companies to essentially bully little ones because they could more easily afford regulations. It's why we have people like Microsoft dominating their industries, or Amazon, because they follow the regulations just enough and it's cheap enough for them to do it. But any small mom and pop who wish to, say, grow their business and try to do what they did, well, they couldn't afford all the regulations and would end up going bankrupt. And lo and behold, guess who's buying up their business? It's the big ones. Which creates a severe issue. Now one might ask, in a laissez-faire economy, which the Gilded Age largely was, barring the tariffs, would monopolies not form? And the answer is no. Despite all the talk we hear about trusts, none of them actually fully controlled the economy, even in their little sectors. Standard Oil had 90% at its peak, yes. However, emphasis on at its peak. Throughout the years, it was constantly losing market share. And indeed, they weren't raising the prices blithely. They were raising them alongside the rest of the market at fairly standard rates. And so, they physically could not take advantage of their sheer amount of market share because of the laissez-faire nature of the economy. In fact, in this book, there are actually several people who found their ways to mess with Rockefeller a little by establishing an oil derrick or a rig and saying, "Hey Rockefeller, you want to buy this?" Rockefeller, naturally wanting to monopolize the market, would say either yes or I'll just bankrupt you. Either way, he would lose money in the endeavor, and the person who set up the new business would laugh as he's running away with a lot of money they took from Rockefeller. So there was an inherent check in the laissez-faire market for how to deal with bad actors or monopolists. In other words, we don't need half the regulations we currently have in the economy. It's also important to note how the economy grows. Does the economy grow because we print money? No, it doesn't. Again, money, as mentioned, is just a go-between. It is not, as one would say, the main driver of the market. The main driver of the market is demand. The reason why is because that's what humans want and need. That's what people are asking for. And so it makes sense to start with demand. If you, for example, let's say you had a command economy, 100 people, you control everything they do perfectly. Assuming that, what's more important? Those 100 people being given orders and just starting to work, or figuring out what those people want and need, and then assigning jobs from there? Naturally, the second option. And that's true with larger markets in more laissez-faire systems as well, is if you want to make the market efficient, you must let demand be satisfied by either others or, in the case of more interventionist systems, the state. The issue is the state tends to suck at it because it acts essentially like a monopoly. Because of its sheer size, especially in the modern world, it's legitimately hard to fathom how big the state is in the modern world compared to what it used to be. Before, it wouldn't even intervene in the most basic of food production. Now, it's in every single aspect of most production, and it's taxing it to fund social services. The state is massive. But importantly, from my point, when it comes down to it, the state, whether it's trying to satisfy my needs, someone else's, or maybe it's just trying to satisfy the politicians and lobbyists, it's probably doing that if we're being honest, is gonna do it inefficiently because it is a monopoly in size. It is the one who controls force, yes, but also, and this is a big one, because of its sheer size, it's like a monopoly trying to expand its reach to other businesses. It has issues because it is so massive that coordinating everything becomes a hassle. You need middle manager on top of middle manager on top of middle manager to make even half of it work. But that creates a lot of inefficiency and a lot of people shifting the blame. It's not like the president can just say, alright guys, we're gonna build a factory that produces microchips. No, you can't do that. Because first you need to make a plan for it. Then you need to find people to hire to do it. And then you need to find people to manage them. And all along the way, especially because of the sheer scale of it, you're gonna run into people who suck. Who are just inefficient and bad at their jobs. And you can't find them half the time because they're hiding among the competent. To use an anecdote from my father, in the VA, there are nurses who are idiots, or who won't do their job. But they're hiding among those who do their job and care for veterans. And so, when the regulatory axe is thrown at the VA, they tend to hit the competent ones as well as the incompetent, because it's hard to isolate them. It's legitimately just a whole problem. Also, leadership is a problem, but that's another story. Back to the point. When it comes to government involvement, it's best minimized for the economy's sake. Have you guys, you probably haven't, but I assume some have heard of the equation for GDP. That's C plus I plus G plus X minus IM equals Why? What this means, for those who are unaware, is consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, plus exports and minus imports equals GDP. What that's important is the first two, investment and consumer spending. You see, the way our system currently works, taxes are lower compared to Europe's at least, and we try our best to deregulate the market as best we can. Unless someone else gets in charge, in which case, up they go. Because, that's the best way to solve economic problems, is regulating and hoping it works. And then it doesn't, and I get to learn about it later and get to laugh at your stupidity. But yeah, back to the point, these two are most important, consumer spending and investments, because one, they contribute to each other, and two, government spending actively takes from the other two, be it inflation or, in the case of a fiscally conservative government, through taxation. Because then you have less investments from businesses and less spending from consumers, and so it actually worsens the GDP overall, or at bare minimum leaves it at net zero, which helps no one. As for imports and exports, as a general rule, tariffs are bad. Now, it's worth noting, they can be used as a negotiating tool. Frankly, I prefer just sending ships there and negotiating via gunboat diplomacy, but let's face it, our current administration is a bit more cowardly than that. Granted, I'm not the one to make that call, but still. Free trade is good because it allows for specialization. For example, who listening has heard of Argentina? Now, they've gotten into the news recently because of Malay, but, well, should I say recently? It works. But Argentina also has an interesting region called the Pampas region, which is very good at a number of things. In fact, the Pampas region produces a lot of cattle. It's very good at raising cattle, and so that allows for, among a number of things, very good beef. The importance of this is, if Argentina was trying to do everything, they couldn't. They just don't have the land, the population, none of it. But if they stuck to producing beef, say, in the Pampas region and specialized in other regions based on what they're good at, or they become more efficient at what they do, and thus produce higher quality goods. In the US, it's the same thing. In Alaska, gold is, let's face it, one of the few commodities they have. They also have oil, natural gas, and fish, of course. What this means is, for Alaska, it's a lot better to focus on that than becoming an industrial superpower. Now, would I recommend it? In general, yeah. But it's good to focus on what you're good at first, which for Alaska is extraction of fossil fuels, mining, and fishing. Also getting idiot tourists, but the tourists help pay for the PFD, so I'll take it. As for California, well, they got a lot of agriculture, they got a lot of shipping. Pretty easy to fill in what they should do there. Well, that and Hollywood drawing a spine, but you can do this with every state and every region. Specialization is the key to making an efficient economy. So with tariffs, because you're trying to do everything yourself, especially if you're a smaller country, but even for a bigger country, the issues become your lack of specialization means you're not producing as good in terms of quality, materials, and products. For example, steel will be of lower quality because you're only competing with yourself, and you're not dealing with people who are specialized in this. You're dealing with people who would, say, be better off making wine or making coal, though I don't think I would wish that on anyone. The coal mines, I doubt, were fun. Just ask Appalachia. But yeah, that's why free trade is generally preferred, because it allows for the specialization, which helps to make people more profitable, and thus their lives better. If you can make more of a profit from your life, you can use that profit to better it. It doesn't have to be an insane amount, but better is better. And that is insanely good for you. There's also the matter of the budget. Now, the budget for a country is very important to its economy for a number of reasons. For one, there's the obvious taxes. The higher taxes go, one, the less you're going to receive of them, because tax avoidance gets stronger the more it is. And the second one's important. The more money is taken from the economy via taxation, the less consumers and investors are going to be putting into it. This creates a few issues. Number one, those investments in consumer goods spending that individuals do create the wealth. They are where the wealth comes from. It is the entrepreneurs and the business owners who own the factories, who own the businesses, who provide services and goods to the people that make the wealth of the country. Less of that occurring means your growth is going to stagnate. And that creates a few issues, especially if you wish to compete with another country economically. We saw this with Reagan. For as many people complain about Reaganomics, and some rightfully so, his tax cuts actually led to an increase in taxable wealth because it reduced the amount people were paying, and so more could invest into their businesses or into their lives, thus allowing them to better them. And that is very, very important. Look at an economic graph of France, which is part of the EU and taxes much more heavily, and the US. You'll notice France is roughly stagnated. They're still growing slightly, but they've pretty much stagnated. They're barely above 08 levels currently. While the US, it's grown quite tremendously. Taxes should only be raised in the extreme case of austerity measures, because in the case of austerity measures, the goal is to reduce them by the end. So it's the same concept as if I were to look at the fact that I have debt on my books. I'm about to go into college, so let's use an easy example, student loans. Let's say I have $30,000 in student loans, and I say, I'm going to want to pay this off quickly so I don't have to pay the interest on it. So I reduced how much I spend on things like, say, eating. Let's say I eat slightly less. Particularly, I don't go out to eat at like McDonald's or fancy restaurants that are local. And at the same time, I pick up a second job so I can generate more revenue. Now, it'll be taxing as all heck. Taxing. But it will allow me to more quickly pay off the debt and thus get back to a normal cycle where I eat the amount I'm happy with and where I work one job which I'm comfortable with. It's the same thing for a state, just with different levers. In the case of the tightening of the belt, that's social spending. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, military. Stuff like that. What it spends it on should be cut in the case of austerity measures. And the other, the second job, so to speak, would be taxation, which can be increased as necessary. Now, as mentioned before, there's a sweet spot for it, but as you increase it to a certain point, you stop getting the rewards. There's a economic principle for this, though the name is currently escaping me right now. Apologies there. But it means that you want to get the tax curve right on the money to maximize revenue, and cut it if you wish to pay off your debts. Currently, both parties are not doing that. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure people in most countries can see that. That's not how they operate. The fiscally conservative people are saying, let's cut taxes and cut social programs, while the liberals are saying, let's raise taxes and raise social programs. None of them are really trying to address the debt. they're just trying to do their own pet causes. Now, I'd say the conservative one's a bit better because more wealth generation means more taxes. But besides that point, and regardless of it, that is not an efficient way to deal with debt. It just isn't. You don't deal with debt by ignoring it. That's how you get houses costing 2 to 3 times what you're supposed to pay for them because you took out a loan to pay for it. That's how you get student loans inflating to $100,000. And let's face it, no one wants to deal with that. You deal with debt by nipping it in the bud. Austerity measures are the best solution to that, though they hurt. Again, as I mentioned with the personal example, the best way to cut expenses for yourself is to look at things like food, which can be variable. They can change. And that is very important. And also, for income, getting a second job is a pain. Assuming you're working 8 hours each, full-time jobs, even if it's just a part-time job at 5 hours a day, that's still 13 hours working. That ain't fun for anyone. So while it hurts, it helps get the economy on the right track, because once the debt's paid off, you can either go back to a more traditional amount of taxes, or, and this is my personal preference, you start working to abolish taxation altogether. The plan in the Tax-Free United States makes it pretty clear how to do this, but quick summary: if you establish a permanent fund, which is invested in things like the S&P or your own local version of it, so a local stock market, and a mutual fund, and then you put the money in, they invest, and you use the dividends to replace the taxes, you can, bit by bit, within a few years, completely abolish the need for taxes. Especially if you decrease the taxes at an equivalent rate to the dividends, and thus encourage economic growth through it. Now, I would argue for this system, but there are, of course, people who would just say, you know what, just cut the taxes, let us have a balanced budget, and we're good. And that works too. I would still argue you should be saving some of that money in a permanent fund for that exact reason of preserving your balanced budget, but hey, to each their own. As for the final important thing to talk about the economy, actually there's a few, but just to end it, those who have money control the economy. Now that doesn't mean we're all completely ruled by the rich and powerful. They have the most influence, certainly. But even if I just had this, let's say I just had $100 to my name, I still have power over the economy, because I can buy things with it. That's the advantage of a capitalist system. If you have money, any money, you can control the economy. You can nudge it, you can shift it. Well, I suppose influence would be a better phrase, but regardless. You can essentially move the economy slightly in whatever direction you want, so long as you have money of some kind. And that is important. Don't think you're powerless just because you don't have as much as someone else. Just having something brings power. If you want this world to be better, in whatever way we imagine, we gotta recognize that power and use it. So then, will you use it?